world might be different if more people practiced this kind of giving in and sharing of knowledge and stories.
My initial thought is that probably the world would be a less competitive place, a lot more generous. A lot of people these days don't want to give of their time without getting something in return for it. And, that's a real shame, I think.
Yeah, and it might also be a world where people are more interested in things and more passionate about things, because I think that's part of what gets us interested in things, is just hearing people's stories and hearing them talk about something that they're interested in, and then we get interested in it. And, so it might be also a world where, people have more passion for different projects and things like that.
My name's Jennene Riggs and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and together with Karli Florisson we're producing a series of documentaries on the early history of Esperance as a resource for the community to learn about who came before and what their stories are and what their lives were like.
And I'm Karli Florisson, a local historian, and I've been sort of researching local history in Esperance for quite a few years now. And so, when this project came up, I think it was Jennene's idea originally, and it just seemed like a really great way to tell these stories. Esperance has got quite a few homesteads around the area that are amazing, have really interesting stories that go with them, but a lot of them aren't accessible for a lot of reasons. So they're either really remotely located or they're privately owned. There just are no resources that are really accessible that tell these stories in our community as well. There are a few books, but they're not accessible, like they're not audiovisual resources, and they're not very accessible to like a wide range of the community. And so that's why we wanted to really tell these stories in a way that everyone will be able to access and understand.
We've been developing it for about a year now, and so there's been a lot of research, a lot of applying for different funding sources, and talking about it with different organisations in the community and getting permissions, and making sure that we're collaborating with people who need to be consulted. And we've done a few interviews, which has been just amazing. And it's really sort of been embraced by a lot of the ancestors of the people who lived in these homesteads as well. Being able to tell their family stories is something that's really important to them too.
Often with history, there are certain stories that get told at the expense of other stories, and so you'll get the stories of particularly these sort of white European settlers who came and, established buildings and all of that sort of thing. But we also want to make sure that the stories of the First Nations people are included. We want to make sure that the stories of the women who also came along and, were such a big part of, establishing these homesteads, that they're included, that some of the workers' stories are included, all that sort of thing. So it's part of making sure that the whole story is told as much as we possibly can.
Particularly the women who lived out in these homesteads were artists, and so a lot of their work sort of tells a story of that place and time and the plants and the animals and the environment that they lived in.
These women, not only were they artists, but a few of them were also collected botanical specimens that they then sent to the chief botanist in the Melbourne Botanical Gardens, who then classified those different plant species. And so they really contributed a lot to classifying and preserving the knowledge of those plant species in the area. And one of them actually did the same thing with insect species. The women's stories are not as well known, but they had some really amazing achievements, the women that lived out in these incredibly remote areas.
We are going out to film several different homesteads out along the Balladonia track sort of area. And these are really remote places, you know, like they take 2.5 hours to get to along rough, boggy bush tracks and in the middle of nowhere. So, you know, you've got to be fully self-sufficient. We have to take all our own water and food and fuel, and let alone the camera gear.
It's an awesome experience, actually, because, yeah, it does sort of feel a bit like stepping into the story in some ways. And I think, you know, a big part of these stories is just the remoteness of the homesteads. And so, yeah, that definitely, when we go out to these homesteads, it will give us a real sense of that, just, you know, distance from everything. The visual aspect of it is really important because people might not be able to go and see these homesteads for themselves, but for them to be able to see them on film, it's almost like being there. You get to see what they're like and, you know, have a little look inside. We think that preserving them on film is important because if the buildings deteriorate, at least they're captured in their, you know, in their present form for the future, for future generations as well.
We just really wanted it to be something that was freely accessible for the community. So, you know, it'll be up on YouTube, online, available to anyone, anytime, to hopefully integrate it into the local school curriculum so that kids can learn about our local history and, you know, sort of, I guess, get a sense of pride and, stewardship of that history, you know, so that they really understand the community where they come from.
Good Futures involves, like you said, stewardship, you know, that idea of stewarding not only the natural environment but also the history that we have in place, contributing to people in the community taking that sort of sense of ownership of this is our history, this is our natural environment, we should look after that and, you know, really, really take care of it. Part of understanding our community means understanding our past and understanding where we've come from. That sense of understanding each other hopefully a bit more if we understand our shared history, I think that also would contribute to, you know, good futures.